welcome to another episode of What the Fuck Paranormal with the Naked Bigfoot. I am your humble host, Mike the Naked Bigfoot. I hope everyone who is on the live tonight is doing really awesome. Good to see everybody. Good to see everybody. Well, we're going to get pretty much straight into the show because I think it's going to go for a while. Hey, everyone. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming on, everybody. Thanks for coming on, everybody. Good to see you all. Let's give it just a second. Let's give it what I call a bullshit second to see if anybody else wants to pop in tonight. Okay. There. The bullshit second has come and gone. So let's begin. I was really, really, really close to being late for tonight's show too. Um, Climbing into bed, and I realized that my fan, I couldn't find the remote control to my fan. Yes, I have a remote control to my fan. Okay, suck it. For those who want to throw, who want to talk ugly about my fan, I love my fan. It's a remote control fan. It does everything with a remote control. Again, I want to get off the whole fan, because tonight is going to be um, probably, I don't know. I've told you guys a lot of a lot of interesting stories that I'd collected and experiences that I've had. So I want to say that tonight's story, this one really affected me. Hex House really affected me. And for some reason, I had all but forgotten about it. But before I start, I almost jumped into it. We got to do the disclaimers. For those of you who do not know, if you're new for tonight's chat, or if you're a new viewer to watch the replay, um, I always give disclaimers at the beginning of my shows. The planned shows, not the spontaneous shows. My spontaneous shows, just I pull those out of my ass and start talking. This is a planned show, so. What the fuck paranormal chat is not here. Well, I'm not here. To change your mind, influence you, change your opinion, change your worldview on whatever deity or deities you may worship or believe in. I am not here to hurt you physically, mentally, or emotionally and or spiritually. My show, I do this show for entertainment and provide information in an educational sort of weird paranormal way. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. If at the end of any of the shows that you watch, any of my shows that you watch, at the end of them, if you have a need to go into this wild and crazy world that we live in and explore it and try to find and discover the wonders of this world for yourself, I ask that number one, I feel like I've done my job and got people to go out and to see this world. But more importantly, I do want you to go out, but I want you to go out and explore this world both safely and sanely. If you have watched any of my previous shows, or if you watch this one tonight, just to let you, do not do some of the dumb shit that I've done. Okay, um, I thought I was immortal in the old days, that nothing would ever go wrong, nothing would hurt me, uh, and I survived most of my encounters and experiences through blind, sheer, dumbass luck. So I do not want you to go out and take the same risks that I took unless you know what you're doing or you're ready to accept the consequences of your actions. With that said, I know that I did that kind of heavy, didn't I? I ended that one a little heavy, so, but do so safely and sanely. Alrighty. The other disclaimer. My nose itches. The other disclaimer. If you have any small children in the room with you now that you do not wish to have be exposed to naughty words or foul language of any sort, please ask them to leave the room or wear headphones so you can hear what I'm saying without exposing them to them. I am not apologizing for the language that I use. It is part of my vernacular, and cuss words do slip out of my mouth on occasion. I do not do it for dramatic effect. I do not do it to shock people. It just pops out of my pops out of my mouth. See, it almost popped out of my mouth again. If you are yourself offended by naughty language, I am not going to apologize for it. Number one, it is who I am. But I do ask that if you can overlook the language, that you stick around and give my show a chance, because I'll guarantee you will be both entertained and informed by my show. You will enjoy it from beginning to end. Also, we play a drinking game on my show. For those who are not aware of the drinking game, I know I see a lot of familiar faces tonight, but if anybody has popped in that has not experienced the drinking game that we play on the show, anytime you hear me say that's a story for another time, or that's a story for another day, or some incarnation of that phrase, please take a sip, shot, or drink of your adult beverage of choice. If you do not drink adult beverages, but still, fuck my back, and you still want to play the game, then please take a sip, shot, or drink of your non-alcoholic beverage of choice. If you're watching the replay and you want to play this game, it sucks ass to drink alone. So watch the watch the show, watch the replay of the show with some friends, and have yourself a little drinking game party while watching it. But by the end of tonight's episode, you more than likely will be drunk off your ass if you're playing the game with adult beverages. I do ask that you do not drink and drive. Do not drink and drive. Do not drink and drive. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Take an Uber, take a Lyft, pass out on a couch, crawl under your office desk, and go to sleep. Sleep it off. Do not drink and drive. Do not drink and drive. Do not drink and drive. Have I said that enough? Do not drink and drive. I care about your safety. Alrighty, let's start with tonight's story. You know I've been building up to tonight's story for last couple of weeks, the Mystery of Hex House. But I'm going to quickly now, if you caught my last episode before this, the episode before that, the sneak peek of this episode that we're doing tonight, if you had a chance to see it, you'll know that I had a visit recently, last couple of weeks ago. God damn, I'm itchy. Fuck. That a couple of weeks ago, I had some old friends come by the farm that I have not seen in a while, whom I adore. They're absolutely amazing. That we met. They are paranormal investigators. They don't have YouTube. They don't have any kind of social media accounts per se. They do what they do to help people. They see their lot in life as going out and helping people. And our paths crossed years ago. And whenever we're nearby and they need help and they need somebody to come in for a consultation, they would always ask me to come in and do a consultation with them to help them figure out what's going on at a location, to help them figure out what exactly it is. Coach, if you may or may not know, I have an extensive knowledge of paranormal. I have a paranormal bestiary of all the things that go bump in the night, both spiritually and physically. And they would call me on an occasion to assess the situation and to see if I can help them, help the people that they're trying to help deal with the situation. That's the long and short of it. If you want more details about that, please see the episode that is the sneak peek of Hex House. I think you'll find it. It's a couple of episodes before this. Um, you'll have to go and listen to that, but you'll hear me talking about them a lot. Um, they had come by to see how I was doing because it had been years, and they'd caught wind about my current situation in life. I do not need to go into details. Those who know me know this already. And we will not make this the Naked Bigfoot pity party tonight. They came to see me because it more than likely is probably the last time they were going to see me. I have a feeling that's the reason why they came by. Uh, Pumpkin beer, by the way, is freaking amazing if you've never had it. So is pumpkin mead. Everybody knows that I make mead. So, well, I used to make mead. I don't make it anymore. So, fuck, I'm itchy tonight. They came by, and in the course of the conversation, they brought up Hex House. And they told me that that's one of the main reasons they wanted to come see me was to tell me what was going on with Hex House. Currently going on with Hex House. Because it'd been, God, it's been years since our initial investigation of the place that I now call Hex House. It's in West Virginia, by the way, for those who don't know. No, I do not live in West Virginia, nor have I ever lived in West Virginia. It's probably the only way that you could possibly insult me is by telling me that I'm from West Virginia. Keep that in mind. I won't go into details about that. That's a story for another day. um, and they brought out. They went back and revisited Hex House recently, and because they caught wind of what was going on at what was going to happen to Hex House. But I'll get into more details of that towards the end of the episode. But that picture you see as the thumbnail to tonight's episode, that is a current picture of Hex House. It's a cinder house, cinder block house. We call them cinder houses for short. Cinder block houses are all through the South. For those who are not aware of cinder block houses, um, they were made they were made cheaply, of course, because they're about 98% cinder block. um, Very little insulation. So they run from being very hot to being very cold depending on the time of year. Um, Plus, they tend to be echoey too. They're strange. If you ever spend any time in a cinder block house, they're it's it's an odd feeling like you're trapped underground when you're in a cinder block house. Again, you can find them all through the South, cinder block houses. They don't build them anymore, by the way, cinder block houses. This used to be a thing many, 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 many years ago. Again, it was a cheap way of doing it, and in some of the less economically advantaged areas, people would you would find a lot of cinder block homes, especially if you go through parts of West Virginia, also in Arkansas, Louisiana, pretty much all the South, parts of Florida, Alabama, Alabama, which I also call Alabama is also the the third circle of hell, but I'll have to tell you guys that story, my Alabama story, another day. That's a story for another day. It's Alabama. Oof, Alabama. Well, they came by to give me good news about Hex House because it took over a decade for Hex House, what was happening at Hex House, to be resolved. But I'm not going to skip too far ahead in the story when you don't even know what's been going on at Hex House or what I discovered initially at Hex House. Um, okay. Again, this was many years ago. Once again, I was called in for a consultation. They got a hold of me and said that there was a lot that they didn't know what to make of this house. It was this cinder block house, this cinder house, was the site. It had exchanged hands many, many times. Um, it's been the site. It was the site of a great deal of just a little background on the cinder block house, on Hex House. Um, that they gave me some initial information about it before I went in. They usually let me go in blind, but they would they would normally would not tell me much about the house when I would go in, and I didn't want to know anything about the house when I went in because I'd always go in and do my thing to figure out what's going there. But they said that the activity there was so insane that they needed to warn me so I would be safe when I went there. Um, they didn't tell me a lot. They just told me a little bit so I could prepare myself. It was a site of a great deal of violence, domestic violence. Uh, Husband had, over the course of the history of Hex House, had killed his wife, shot her in the head with a 22 rifle. Um, and he was going to kill his kid, but their neighbors that lived behind them towards the river heard the initial shot, which was odd because you can't hear a lot of things outside of a cinder block house. And they ran in and they stopped him before he killed his two kids. And during the confrontation with the neighbors trying to stop him from killing his kids, he killed one of the neighbors. He didn't shoot them; he beat them to death with the gun. He beat them to death with the gun, bashed their heads in with it. And from what I understand, he's still in jail. He hasn't died yet. He's still in jail. Um, he's still alive and still in jail, from what I understand. But they told me, when I went there, I number one driving out there to it. It was off the beaten path, which many of these places are. If you go through West Virginia, especially there, unless you're near a major, and I'm going to use it in quotation marks, a city. Um, you'll find clusters of homes in areas. When I say clusters, with whatever flat land is available, people will build a lot of homes there. Usually, it's a large tract of land that was bought by one family, and as the kids grow up, they will cut off pieces of the larger property and deed it to them, and they can start their own family and build their own house on the property. This is that sort of kind of situation with Hex House when I went there. Um, but apparently, after the murders at Hex House, nobody wanted to buy the house. Nobody wanted to move back into the house naturally. Nobody wanted to be a part of the house anymore. So, just to give you a brief history of the house, after the murders, there was a developer great guy. He was a local. He was born in West Virginia, but he moved out, went to college, came back, and he wanted to improve parts of these different neighborhoods. And uh, he wanted to buy that house, and just he wasn't going to tear it down. What he wanted to do was he wanted to fix it up, add more to it, make it more modern. He was going to modern. He was buying a lot of houses up like that and a lot of property like that in the area. And what he was doing was he was going to make affordable houses for the locals, for people to move into, that could either rent it or they could buy it, but they'd buy it at affordable, decent prices, or rent, or they would pay rent, affordable rent for them. Um, as a lot of people may or may not know, um, West Virginia is a very economic, and it still is in a lot of places, economically depressed area. Coal mining is still big there. They don't do any crops or anything unless you count cooking meth as a crop. I had to make that joke. Um, there's a lot of meth cooking in West Virginia. See, they don't produce any crops or anything, but there's a lot of mining there. Just not coal, but there's other mining that happens in West Virginia as well for different for gemstones, rare earth metals, all sorts of things in West Virginia. Plus, you see some of the best rapids you'll ever want to see. On this side of the Mississippi as well. They've got beautiful, beautiful rivers there to fish in, and again to boat in and shoot the rapids on. So West Virginia does, they do offer a lot. But that's what he wanted to do. He came into it for all the right reasons. And he was a rational man and a man of a reason, him and his family. And he was having some problems with Hex House, with people, the people he had coming there to fix it up and to renovate and to fix up the actual property around it. I saw that one, Harper's. Um, yeah. Oh God, that's an interesting part of West Virginia. I'll have to tell you later. That's a story for another day. Heavy metal. Um, there's stories about Harper's Ferry, which you may or may not know. Well, West Virginia is fucked up haunted, by the way, if no one knows that. There's so many weird things that happen in West Virginia. Besides the Mothman, there's so many weird things that happen in West Virginia. I could probably fill up several volumes just based on my experiences in West Virginia and the lore that I gathered from West Virginia. But again, stories for another day. We're talking about one specific story tonight. This developer who bought Hex House, well, he was having some problems that he couldn't quite explain. And some of the locals in the area told him they needed somebody to come in to exorcise the place, so to speak. Um, it was haunted. We'll go more into that in a second. Yeah, tonight's episode is going to take a while because this Hex House was an interesting place. Well, boy, was it interesting. But it has a happy ending. Trust me, it has a happy ending. Um, well, my friends, they went there, and they are very rarely shocked and or scared by anything. But Hex House shocked and scared them. So they called me in, and that's where I walked in. As I started in the beginning, this is where I went into. But they wanted to give me a little bit of the background of the place before I came in, because they this place rattled them enough um, to the point where they had to, break their own rules and keep me in the loop about what was going on there, about some of what was going on there. Well, the background history, not the actual activity. They would not go in. I mean, I got to Hex House. The grass was overgrown. Everything was just shabby. Everything had gone to hell. There was some heavy equipment, earth movers and stuff like that were parked outside. That I noticed were parked outside the driveway into an adjacent field, which I thought was weird. If you're going to do any kind of work on the property, they should be on the property. That's the first thing that I noticed. Um, I also noticed that some of the scaffolding that was going around the house looked like it was bent, like it had been in a fire and it had been warped by fire. Some of the scaffolding they had around the house to work on the house and to get up to the roof and work on the roof and such. Um, just my observations when I was walking there too, and they would always let me walk in, and they were walking behind me quietly, answering questions if I had any of them. Okay. when I when I got out of the car, they met me. Um, well, they saw me coming down the road, and they didn't want me to come into the driveway, so they met me at the end of the driveway, and they said, "We don't want you to drive your vehicle down the driveway and park it near the house." I went, okay, I won't park my car near the house. And they said, "Trust us. We'll tell you later. You gotta trust us." I said, "Okay, I do trust you." As soon as I stepped out of the road and stepped foot on the property, um, I got weak. Um, like I was having a super low blood sugar moment where I thought that I was going to collapse for a minute when I stepped on the property. And I must have turned very, very pale because they grabbed me from side to side and said, "It's okay." They said, "Deep breaths, deep breaths. It'll pass. Give it a moment. It'll pass." I went, "Okay." And I looked at them and said, "You fuckers were expecting this, weren't you?" And they just grinned, and went, "You haven't experienced anything yet." I said, and I looked at them and said, "I guess that's why I'm here, is to figure out what this is." And they said, "Yeah, pretty much." So it took a minute or two for me to feel like I was no longer a wobbly kneed, and walked up to the house. And again, I observed that the scaffolding, everything was grown up. Um, the scaffolding that had been put around the house, the metal scaffolding, parts of it looked warped, melted in places. Not melted, but looked like it had been subjected to a bonfire where the metal would warp, and and the wood that they were using on the scaffolding had fallen through on it. And I wondered to myself, why the hell did the workers leave it in this kind of shape? So I approached the house. We were going to go in the front door. There was a cinder block outbuilding behind it, that looked like it was filled with garbage bags, like somebody had been storing their garbage back there. If you know anything about some of these economically depressed areas, a lot of people would store their garbage that way. They didn't have garbage pickup. They would store it, and then they would either burn it, or they would have a pit in the woods they'd go back and dump it in. And that still occurs in West Virginia, um, and other states as well, just not West Virginia. I walked up to him and I said, "Okay, let's go in." Went up to the front door, uh, put my hand on the doorknob, and the porch light, turned on. And if you've ever been in a room where it sounds like there's a power surge and the light gets really bright and buzzy sounding, and then stops and goes out, well, that's what the fuck happened when I turned that. The light sounded like it was going to pop. Before it actually popped, though, it turned off and went dark. And I went, okay. I opened the door and stepped in. First thing that hit me in the face, it felt like something, like a giant was breathing on me. Um, it smelled like old earth being blown in my face. The smell of old, decaying earth being blown into my face. Um, Humid air being blown into my face. And I started coughing. They grabbed me again because I felt like I was going to fall over again when that happened. And I said, "Were you expecting that to happen to me as well?" And they just shook their head yes. And I went, okay. I went in. There are 5 rooms in that house. But I felt, and there was a hallway going down the center of the house that would break off into other rooms of the house. Um, Dining room in the very back, the cooking area in the very back, uh, a bathroom and a living room, and a part of the kitchen, to my right. Most of the living areas to my left, and another bathroom, which was unusual. Those houses usually didn't have more than one bathroom, if they had a bathroom at all. This one had 2, which was interesting in a cinder block house. But that's a story for another day. I won't get into the nuances of cinder block housing. And they stepped away from me when we went into the house. I walked down the hallway looking to the left and to the right. And I was trying to find the proverbial heart of the house, the center of whatever it was that was going on, because they had not given me any details up to that point of what was going on. As I walked down the hallway, again, the lights turned on and the hallway grew bright and went out. And again, they would turn on brightly for a minute and then they would go back out. It actually happened in every room I went to. The lights would turn on. Not all of them, one of the lights in the room would turn on, glow very brightly, and then go out. I hadn't opened myself up at this point, mentally or spiritually, to try to feel if there was anything inside the house, whether it was something spiritual, whether it was human or non-human that was inside of the house, once human or non-human that was inside of the house. Um, I felt a tug, not a physical tug. Um, it just felt like something was pulling the left side of my face, wanting me to go into the master bedroom of the house, not knowing that it was the master bedroom. I followed I followed that pull, and it got stronger and stronger and stronger, um, until I went, and I finally found the largest bedroom in there, which was the master bedroom, which happened to be the bedroom in which he killed his wife. And right outside the bedroom, in the hallway, is where he beat to death one of the neighbors who had come there, to try to keep him from killing his kids. I kept hearing, it sounded like a low pitched whistling scream when I walked into the bedroom. There was a lot of broken furniture in there. Um, the mattresses on the old, it was a wrought iron bed, and you know the back center wall had a wrought iron bed, which was their bed. For those who are not know what a wrought iron bed is, please look it up. The old wrought iron beds, they were usually passed down from, through the family. The beds were, usually to the mother would give the bed to the daughter, would inherit it. Some of these beds have been in their family for generations, and this looked like one of those old hand done wrought iron beds. Have a great night, Amy. Thank you for stopping by. Um, the mattress that was on it was a down mattress. I want to say down, but I know that it was mostly chicken feathers and various other things that were in the two mattresses that were on there, and they had been looked like they had been torn up and chewed up in there. There was pieces of it all over the place. All the bits and pieces of the furniture that were in there were broken into pieces. But when I walked into that room, no lights turned on in that room, and it was in the middle of the day that I was there. But that room was very, very dark. There was one window to that room. It was a double window in that room. And it was facing out towards it should have been getting a great deal of sunlight through that window to illuminate that room. But I don't think if the sun was actually in the middle of that room itself, plucked out of space and brought to that room, that it wouldn't illuminate that room at all. And I got cold, freezing, freezing, freezing cold after hearing that high-pitched screaming that was in that room. And in the far corner of that room, near what was left of a closet door that was over there, I saw, it was a dark, shadowy part of the door. I didn't see a shadow per se, but I knew something was standing there in that corner looking at me. I'm picturing it in my head right now, guys, if you're wondering, so I can describe it to you. It's like something in that shadow, something in that shadowy part of the room blinked its eyes at me. It's like it went from light to dark, and I knew those were eyes that were blinking at me, and that something was watching me from that corner. And I said to myself then, I said, now it's time for me to open up to this house. I need to know what that is in that corner that's blinking its eyes at me right now. And I put my hand up behind me to let everybody know that was, my friends that were with me, to back off. Back off. I was about to do my thing. Deep breath. I centered myself for a second. And deep breath, I exhaled. And I opened myself up. How do you open yourself up? What do I mean by that? We as people, we walk around and we have guards around ourselves, around our emotions, around our mind, around our spirit. We always have walls up, whether we mean to or not. It's something we do from on an instinctual level, that we put up these barriers to protect ourselves from physical and spiritual and external influences around us. It takes a lot of practice to find those barriers and remove them and open yourself up to everything. You become hypersensitive. Your senses become heightened, and that includes your spiritual senses. If I can't think of a better phrase to put it to explain what that's like. When you remove all of those barriers, your senses, you're no longer sensing just the physical world around you. You're sensing much deeper than that. You're sensing the spiritual world around you, what lies beneath the physical world. You begin to sense it. And that's what it's like pulling it away. You're assaulted by crazy sensory input and imagery. And it takes a moment. It'll take your breath away. It takes a moment for you to. You've heard me describe insight in the past. For those who haven't seen the episode on insight, that's something my family is. It's good with my family was insight. So I opened my insight. I made myself vulnerable, so I could experience what was going on at that house. And when I did it, I usually count to 5 right when I do it. I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I just drop everything, drop all my guards, and open up everything in my mind, in my spirit, everything. And when I did that, it felt like I was being swallowed alive. That something was trying to eat me in that room. I fell back. It was such a horrible sense of a predatory sense in that room. I fell back. And when I fell back, landed flat on my ass, of course, when I fell back. It felt like something was holding, was pushing down on my shoulders and on my chest, trying to make me lay flat. Normally, I wouldn't resist something like that. I would let the experience wash over me until I could figure out whether it was actually happening or it was something that my senses were interpreting was happening to me from the energies around me. What the fuck is wrong with my eye tonight, guys? That's not good. My eyes look weird. Um, but I realized it wasn't my senses interpreting the energies around me. There was something literally pushing me down, um, and trying to hold me down when I did that. It felt like a mixture of ice water and oil, of icy water and oil that was coiling around my arms and legs and around my chest and pushing and pushing and pushing. It felt wrong. It felt predatory. It felt like if it pushed me down, that it was going to, once I was on the ground, it would devour me. That's what it felt like. That it would gobble me up. And I apparently squeaked out one word when this was going on because I couldn't catch a good breath. My chest was being compressed so hard I could barely breathe. But apparently I said help. And that's when my friends rushed into the room and picked me up and pulled me out of the room. I didn't close myself off yet because when they pulled me out of the room into the hallway, it felt like I was drowning, like I was drowning in the hallway, that the house was sucking me under like quicksand. The house was devouring me. The house was pulling me down through the ground. Um, they told me that I had gotten incredibly heavy, like they were holding a log. They couldn't hold me up anymore, and they let me go and fall down. They couldn't hold me up, and I fell down. I didn't have those coils around me anymore. It felt again when I was looking up at the ceiling of the hallway. The It looked like it was just it was like the house was folding in around me and pulling me down inside of it into its heart or into its mouth to swallow me. And I said one more word. I said out, out. And they grabbed me. I couldn't, no matter what I did, I couldn't close myself off. Whatever was happening to me, it was flooding me. It was not letting me close myself off. It was not letting me try to protect myself at all. And I felt a combination when they were dragging me out of the house the best they could. I felt a certain kind of malicious glee coming from every room of that house, that it was enjoying what was going on. Whatever was there was enjoying it, what was happening to me. It was so malignant, so dark. But what was happening to me it pleased it, made it happy. And it wanted to do more. It wanted to see me, it wanted to see me in greater discomfort. I got that distinct feeling. So they dragged me out the front door onto the ground. And I could start to breathe again. And it literally took me almost an hour to pull my shit together sitting there. I started crying like a baby when I was there. That house was horrible. What was going on in that house was absolutely horrible. When I finally got my shit together, we all sat out in the yard. And I looked at them and I said, what the fuck is this place? I said, tell me, what's been going on here? And that's when they started telling me more of the story, just not the murders that happened there. And the violence that had been happening at that house. They said when the developer came in to take it over and to start working on the house, that he had people that couldn't spend more than 20 minutes in the house. None of the people he hired to work on the house, to renovate the house, could spend more than 20 minutes inside the house, without them saying fuck this and walking off the job. They said it felt like that they were always being watched, that something would always scare them, would make them frightened to be in that house. The scaffolding, um, they couldn't keep the scaffolding erect because whenever anybody got on the scaffolding outside of the house, the scaffolding within no time flat would buckle and fall over with people on it. And he had two men. One of them broke his arm falling off the top of the scaffolding, um, and the other one was at the bottom when the scaffolding fell over on top of him, and he got a concussion. He got busted in the head by some of the planks that were in the scaffolding, hit him in the head, and he had to go to the hospital with that. Um, that any power equipment that they were using inside of the house would stop working after a while completely. Brand new drills, both corded and battery powered drills. Any of the lights they had in there, they wouldn't stay. They wouldn't last. They would any external lighting they brought in to illuminate what they were working on. The bulbs would burst, or they would just stop working. Period. And I mean stop working. If they took them off the property and took them someplace else to try to use them, they were still dead. So whatever electrical device came on that property, it was killed, literally killed, and could not be used again. Um, that's some of the heavy equipment they were using to try to take out some of the cinder block house back outbuildings. They were going to push those outbuildings over. That the equipment started breaking down on the property. As soon as they started up, and as soon as um, they started moving the earth or trying to push over that little building back there, the equipment would stop working. It would take a couple of hours before they could start it back up. But if they tried to start using it again, it would turn off again. It was scaring everybody half to death being on that property. The developer said he was having nightmares going home every night from the job site. Not only was it a nightmare working on the site, but when he would go home, he was having nightmares of this dark shadow man trying to, with a gun in his bedroom, shooting him, and he'd wake up screaming every night that he was being shot in the head by some shadowy figure that would appear at the foot of his bed. And that his four kids were being terrorized by the shadowy figure in their dreams as well. They'd come in there and screaming and crying to their parents in their bedroom, telling them that there's a man under their bed with a gun. And when he would go in there and look, there would be absolutely nothing. But it looked like something had pulled the sheets and the blankets underneath, started pulling them under, like something reached out from underneath the bed and was pulling the sheets and the covers off the beds and was pulling them underneath the beds. He did start noticing that. Um, to the point where he was freaking out. And that's the reason why he called my friends in to see if they could figure out what was going on with that house and if they could help them with it. When they told me that, and I told them what I experienced in there, that I felt like the house was eating me alive. Um, that there was something incredibly vicious, gleefully vicious, and gleefully malignant inside of that house. Um, they wanted to know what it was. They said, "Well, what do you think it was?" And I told them I didn't think there was a spirit inside the house. I told them that I thought the house itself had developed. Okay, I'm going to have to explain this a little bit before I go on. In the world of the paranormal and the supernatural, um, people talk about, the most famous thing in the supernatural world is the haunted house, where the house itself is got the spirits of the once human or non-human or once dead, once living are haunting it. It's being possessed by some kind of, it's got some kind of spirits walking the hallways. Um, but there is the rare occurrence, and it's incredibly rare, um, where a house will develop its own spirit. That something wakes up the house. And in this case, it was from the madness of those murders, the bloodshed, all the anger, um, all the violence that had happened over that house over the decades, culminating with the murders that happened in that house. That the house itself was the entity, was the spirit, was the cause of the hauntings, was the house itself. That all the violence, all the madness, all the death that happened in that house um, had coated the inside of the walls of that house and contaminated the land around it, uh, to where it took on a life of its own, and it took on a purpose of its own, a malicious purpose of its own. And that's what I told them, that I believe that the house itself was the cause of what was happen was what was making happening what was happening there, was the house itself. Um, I know it's going to sound crazy, huh? Something crazy that Mike said, but the house was alive. The house was it was alive. It was aware. The house was aware. Um, that's better. I think that is better to say it that way. That the house was aware. Um, that the spirit, that house's spirit, was twisted and dark and vicious. Again, the spirit of that house was created from all the violence, the madness, and the death that happened at that house. That had made that house. The house responded to it and became a malicious and malevolent. I'm not going to use the word evil. Okay, I'm not going to use the word evil. There's a lot of evil, but there's a lot of malevolent, hateful people out there that are not particularly evil or don't fall into the category of evil. This house was sadistic. It liked causing harm. It liked causing pain. It fed off of, as everybody well knows, and I've said in the past, spirits in general manifest themselves and continue to exist on this mortal world of ours, this mortal plane of ours, by having a source of energy for it to continue to feed from and to manifest, to be able to manifest there. And this house was using the fear and the pain of whoever was around it, and whoever would come in contact with it. It would feed off of that pain and that fear that it invoked. To the point, now this house can stain you. A spirit like this can stain you. And that's what I was telling them there that time. It can stain you with its malevolence. It can make you sick, physically, mentally, and spiritually sick. How can I put it to explain what was happening with the developer and his children and his wife and what they were experiencing when they left the house? Because by all means, if he left the house, he should have left that spirit behind him. But again, the spirit can stain you. It was supernaturally radioactive. Let me explain that. It's as if somebody walked into a Like somebody walked into the middle of a nuclear reactor and they became irradiated. And when they left there, they left the nuclear reactor, but they took, the radiation with them, the sickness with them, the radiation sickness with them. Um, and that radiation sickness and the radioactivity that was on their clothing could spread to those around them. And in this case, it spread to his kids and to his wife when he went home with it, that this supernatural radiation did. I hope that makes sense. Um, we all know I enjoy turning a phrase whenever possible. Supernatural radiation, so it's trademark. No one can use that without giving the naked Bigfoot some credit. And the thing was, he kept coming to the house and getting, irradiated by that house every time he walked into it. But again, something like that, if, when you walk off, it does fade away if you don't make any more contact with the house or come back to the house. That supernatural radioactivity would fade, you know. It would disappear. It would dissipate over time. But the bad thing was he kept coming back to the house and was getting irradiated again and again and again when he would go there. So, it may fade for a day or two and he'd go back to the house and he gets irradiated by the house again. So he's taking it home with him again. So this is how I was explaining it to them. And I said, I want to be able to prove that I'm right, that there's not the spirit or a spirit, the spirit of the guy that killed his wife and that was still in that house in some way, or that the act of killing his wife did not, summon something dark to that house. I said, I want to make sure, let's make sure that I'm right about this. I said, but I'm not going back in that house to figure it out. We'll stay outside the house. So I went to my my big black bag of bad things. Um, there's something that I had the opportunity to learn how to make. It's called crossing water. Crossing water is a blend of blessed spring water, water that's taken from the mountains. It's blessed, but it detects malevolence. It detects I'm not going to say evil. I don't like using the word evil very often. It reacts to dark spirits, to dark energies. Um, if it is a ghostly spirit, if something was once human, um, the water will actually begin to cloud up. It'll cloud up and get whitish looking. The water will. Um, I love crossing water. I think I still have some of that shit here somewhere. It's great stuff. It's a mountain thing, by the way, crossing water. It is great Granny Voodoo. She was good with the crossing water. It has other things in it too besides water. It has, a few odds and ends you have to add to it, and then, before it's blessed um, and used. It can also be used to pull spirits out of people as well. But that's a story for another time. I have to tell you the story of how crossing water can be used for that as well. Well, I had a quart jar of it in my big black bag of bad things. And I took it out, and I had a bunch of smaller jars of it in there too, a bunch of empty small vials in there. So I poured some of that in each, and in several vials, and into four, one for me, one for each one of them. Um, but it's used to detect what kind of spirit is in the house. If it's a non-human spirit, um, the water will actually get a pinkish to red color to it. So, if the water gets cloudy and white looking, then you're dealing with the spirit of somebody who had died in the house or a human type spirit. If it's a non human spirit um, or an unhuman spirit, I don't use that very often. It will get reddish in color. Almost sort of, depending on the strength of the entity or how many entities are there, it can actually turn blood red. The water will turn red. Um, but you have to add something to the place you're at, trying to figure out what spirit it is, divining the spirit. You have to add something from the environment to the water when you do it. In this case, it was from this. I wanted to see if I was right about the house. If the house is the source of the malevolence, it was the source of what was going on. I was pretty damn sure I was right, but this crossing water would prove it. I said, we're not going to go back in the house, but we are going to go around the house, and we're going to get soil from the four corners of the house. And we're going to put a pinch of it in the water. And then we're going to touch the house, the cinder blocks, and we're going to touch the top of the water when we do that and see what color the water turns. You only put a pinch of the soil from the corners of the house, by the way, so it's not enough to discolor the water. It won't make it white, it won't make it red. Okay, those are the two colors you're looking for to see what kind of spirits it are. But I suspect that something else was going to happen, but I didn't tell them that. So, we were at the four corners, and, each one of us, and we did our thing. I got my little pinch of soil, with a little grass blade in it, and I dropped it in the water. Then I took my finger, rubbed it on the house, the cinder blocks, and I touched the top of the water with it. And then you swirl it a little bit when you do that to see what color the water is going to turn. The water turned black. Inky black. Like somebody had dropped some India ink. Darkest ink you could possibly imagine. Black as paint. And the water got thick inside the vial. Black. And it scared me. When I saw that, it scared me. I said, okay, I need to make sure that this just wasn't me. I got to see if this happened to everybody else. So we went back to the front yard. They held up their vials, and they said, I thought you said it was supposed to turn red or white. And when they held up their vials and said that, I noticed that they had all turned black. Well, and again, that scared the ever-living hell out of me when I saw that. And I got very quiet, and I said, we need to get off this property right now. Right now. And I just turned around and started walking away as fast as possible, heading back to my car. I didn't stop until I got to my car, and I leaned up against it. It felt like I had ran a marathon when I got there, but I hadn't. I was completely out of breath when I got there. And they said, well, what the hell does this mean? What does black water mean? What does black mean? I said, that means that everything around us is tainted. And they said, well, what does that mean? I said, it means that house is what's tainting everything around here, including us when we go in there. The house is alive. I said, well, what the hell can you do about that? Can't you exorcise the house or cleanse the house? I said, no, you can't cleanse a house like that to make it inhabitable again. It's alive. The house itself is aware and alive. And I said, if it will know if you go in there and try to do a cleansing. If you try to do a cleansing, it's going to hurt you. It's going to make you wish you were never alive. And it's going to end up hurting you really bad. Really bad, if not outright killing you. I said, I'm not going back in there. And I said, well, what should we tell the developer then? I said, I would tell him that he needs to, number one, not sell that house to anybody or try to rent that house to anybody. and to keep people off the property of that house as much as possible and not go back into it. If he doesn't go back into it, he won't bring back any part of it back to his family again. The dreams will stop with his family. I knew that would to be true. That would stop. But that house, there was no way to ever make it habitable again. For humans, at least. For people, at least. There was no way to make it habitable. It wouldn't try to kick anybody out. It would keep people for as long as it could there, feeding off of them, feeding off of their fear, and hurting them as much as it could. Because it got off on it. I'll just put it that way. It got off on it. That house got off on hurting people. It fed off of all of that pain and rage. It enjoyed it, what it did. Absolutely enjoyed it. And I said, he might as well chuck this up as a loss. And I said, is this why you didn't want me to drive onto the property? And that's when they told me they had driven their Jeep onto the property. And something killed their battery. Their battery was completely drained in their Jeep. And they went out to get another battery and brought it. The engine would turn over, and then it would stop, and the battery would be drained again. The house was killing the battery of their Jeep. They ended up having to push the Jeep off the property, out of the driveway, back into the road, and then had to put a new battery in it, and it worked just fine. It would kill the battery of the Jeep every time they tried to do it. And they said that's the reason why we didn't want you to bring your car onto the property, because you wouldn't have gotten your car back off the property had you done that. That was the first time I had ever experienced something like that. And it shook me to my core that something inanimate, like a house, can become malicious. Houses are normally inviting. They're places of safety. They're places of love. But not this house. It had been twisted and warped into its spirit, because all dwellings have a spirit, that, it's a warming, inviting spirit that a house provides, that you help create as a family when you're in a house. But all this evil that had happened in that house and bad stuff had happened in that house had warped and twisted the spirit of that house until it became aware and became a creature of malice and ill intent on anybody that would come there. And they asked me a good question. They said, well, do you think you can just burn it down and raise the land? I said, that probably wouldn't be wise to do that. Because if you start pushing that house down and if you could even get, an earth mover to push that house down, it would not let you do that. There would be more accidents than you could possibly imagine, and it would kill the battery of every single thing that came on that property, kill the engine of anything that was brought on that property. I mean, it was already happening on that property. I said, well, can we do anything to it? I said, well, you can take, there's a mineral that you can find in through the Appalachia. We called it Heartstone, but it's actually its proper name is kyanite. It's a mineral. It's used in a lot of things, but in the mountains, kyanite is used to seal off locations. It's used in cemeteries. Spiritually, it's used to seal off locations. Cemeteries were one of them. Funeral homes were another one of them. Any place that could have, if you thought a spirit was going to leave that property, or a spirit was on that property that could leave, you'd use ground kyanite, or you would bury pieces of kyanite on the property to keep it there, because kyanite grounds supernatural energy. It grounds it out, doesn't let it go past it. If supernatural energy encounters it, it actually grounds it and sends it into the earth to where it can do no harm. So I got the kyanite powder and a couple of pieces of kyanite out of my bag, and we went to the corners of the yard and we sealed off the yard around the house with kyanite. That would ground off the energies there. I said, this is the best that we can do, is to keep it from spreading past this house as much as possible. Um, so that was the end of that part of the story. They went back to the developer. They told him what was going on. He believed everything they said. Um, he actually put up a fence off on the other side of the kyanite that we'd put around there. He erected a very large fence around it, wooden fence around it, so nobody could go on the property again. He gave up on the property. He put up a fence around it where people couldn't go in there and trespass on it and get hurt from it. And that was the end of the story, or so I thought. The house was sealed off. And couldn't move beyond where it was. And people, would normally not go in there except for horny teenagers or something that would go in there and tell spook stories about the place and get fucked up. So kyanite is a gemstone, but it's also a mineral as well. It's a semi-ferrous mineral that can be found. Kyanite crystals are usually found in the same type of rock in which the kyanite that I'm talking about is found within. So it's hard to believe I know this shit, isn't it? I just saw your comment about the kyanite gemstone. So kyanite comes in a couple of different forms. Industrial kyanite's what they call it now. Not the kyanite gemstone, although kyanite gemstones are quite beautiful. Some of it reminds me of really high quality fluorite, but that's a story for another time. I'm going off subject. Well, that ends my involvement in Hex House. A couple of weeks ago, when they came by to tell me, they brought me that picture of Hex House where the fence had been taken down off from around it, and the yard, they had somebody. They were no longer, the property had been sold. Apparently, it had been sold 4 or 5 times over. But the current owner went in. He was a little bit more paranormally savvy, and the current owner of Hex House. And he wanted to bury the house. So that picture they showed me is where the people had gone onto the property with tools and not with machines. And they were beginning to take apart the house from the outside inward. They were making the house collapse inward. What they ended up doing is they put shaped charges around the corners of the house, and they blew the house apart. They blew it apart, and then they burned it. Once the house was broke down, they burned it completely. Nobody caught on fire. Nobody had a heart attack. Nothing dark and evil reached it from the ground and killed anybody. But they asked me, well, why do you think it didn't do anything to save itself? I said, well, probably because nobody had given any attention to that house, is that it probably became weak. It didn't have anybody coming to it to keep its batteries charged. It didn't have it didn't have humans to interact with. Again, except for the occasional horny teenager or something, or adventurous teenager that would go over top of that tall ass fence over in there to see what would happen at that house, to investigate the house, because everybody knew the history of that house and the legend of that house. I said, but it didn't have a family living in it. It didn't have constant contact with people in which to feed from their fear, their anguish, their pain. and it became weak, so much so that it couldn't defend itself. When the latest owner decided to get a bunch of people together with sledgehammers and tear it down. Well, tear down as much as they could, blow up parts of the walls, and burn the rest of it. Um, they asked me, well, do you think the house is dead now? I said, I think the heart of it's dead. I said, but if I were you, I would never try to take a piece of that cinder block or any of that soil from that property and test that out. I wouldn't be willing to test out whether that land and that house was truly dead or not. Um, I wouldn't whatsoever. But it was nice to hear um, that thing had met its fate. And it closed a chapter. One of the few one of the few experiences I've ever had where there was no definitive closure. And they came to me to tell me the story of the death of that house to give me that little bit of closure about that, because it's one of the few things that I ever got myself involved in where I didn't feel that I did anything good there. That there was no, I didn't leave things better behind me when I left. And it was nice to hear that that house was, in all intents and purposes, it was now dead. It made me happy, it made me smile. And I needed that when they told me that story, that Hex House had died. And to quote, let me end it with this quote. And it's from Pet Sematary, one of my favorite movies, where Judd said, sometimes dead is better. And in this case, the case of Hex House, that house that house being, dead was better for everybody that lived around it. Well, for all my intrepid and friends and paranormal investigators out there, if you ever go to a house and you stand in the house and you have an overwhelming feeling that something wants to eat you, that something just isn't quite right, that you feel like a turkey sitting on a platter during Thanksgiving, that might be a good sign to you to turn around and get the hell out of there. Because you never know what might be living in the house, or if the house might be the one that is alive. And it sees you as the next Blue Plate special. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Awesome to see you all. Thank you all for turning out. I want to thank everybody who watches this replay. I do hope you enjoy it. If you are so inclined, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button if you already don't subscribe. If you have any comments or constructive criticism, please leave it in the comments section. Or if you have any questions for me, specifically, you can ask those questions in the comments section. You can also go on Twitter. My handle is at VoodooMan3. Or if you Google Mike the Naked Bigfoot, you'll find me. You can follow me on Twitter at VoodooMan3. You can definitely ask me questions, both as a DM. I do not accept dick pics anymore, so cut those out. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. I do follow back. If you've been playing tonight's drinking game, by now you're probably a little bit schnookered. Do not drink and drive. Do not drink and drive. And again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I look forward to seeing you all in the next story, the next tale, the next show. This has been another episode of What the Fuck Paranormal Chat with the Naked Bigfoot. I am your host, Mike the Naked Bigfoot, wishing you all a fantastic evening.